Welcome to Production Planning and Inventory Management course. So myself, Dr. Hakeem-Ur-Rehman. So in this lecture, I'm going to introduce what is a production planning and inventory management. Okay. So for this particular course, I would recommend the 6 books which I am going to follow. Especially for the inventory management, I am going to follow these 2 books. But if you are interested in the research, I highly recommend this particular book, which is a Zipkin's book, Fundamentals of Inventory Management. But right now, for this particular course, I am going to consider these 2 books for the inventory management part. For the production planning part, I am going to consider these 3 books. Okay. So regarding the material for this particular course, so you can go to this Google Classroom, okay, and where you will find out all the PowerPoint slides, related reading material, class activities, and so on. Okay. So in this lecture, I'm going to talk about what is the supply chain, what are the structure and the component of a supply chain, and then I will briefly discuss about what is a production planning and what is a supply chain planning. Okay, so what is the difference between the production planning and the supply chain planning, and then we will discuss the hierarchical decision which we are doing in order to develop the appropriate production plan. So as well as we will see that where these production planning decisions exist within the decision matrix of the supply chain management, or we can say the supply chain planning matrix, or even we can call as advanced planning systems. Okay, and then I will talk about briefly about where the inventory exists within the supply chain. Okay, so in this lecture, I'm going to talk about these uh, few topics that is regarding supply chain, structure and component, production planning and supply chain planning, as well as inventory. So let's first of all discuss what is a supply chain. So in a supply chain, that is basically is the network of firms or the facilities which is basically involved to transforming the process of the raw material to the finished good, or you can say product, and into the distribution of the product to the customer. So when which mean we have the network of in companies, or you can say firms or the facilities which are converting the raw material into the final product. Those final product goes to the customers. So in a simple scenario, what is the supply chain? If we are saying this is the basically the supplier, this is the customer. So within the supply chain, in this simplified example, we are basically managing 3 types of flows. One is called as information flow, or we are managing the physical flow, that is the physical product flow. Okay, as well as the financial, or you can say cash flow, we are managing. Okay, so once we are saying that we have to manage the supply chain, that means this supply chain may have the multiple parties. Like in the previous slide, which we have seen over here, as you can see, this is the simplest form of the supply chain. We have one supplier, we have one customer, right? But in a multiple party, we may have the suppliers have may have the supplier. Similarly, this particular supplier have the customer, and then they have the customers. Okay, so these multiple parties may have the linear relationship, or they may have the complex, or as well as the non-linear relationship. When we are saying the linear relationship, which mean this particular supplier is sending the product to this customer, so this particular supplier sending the product to this customer, this particular supplier sending the product to this customer, and so on. So this is the linear relationship, right? When we are talking about the non-linear relationship, which means this particular supplier is sending to this one, or this is sending to this one, or it might be possible this supplier is directly sending to this particular firm as well as the material, or maybe it is directly sending to the material to the customer. So this is you can say the example of the complex, or they may have the non-linear relationship, right? So in reality, supply chain is quite complex and having the non-linear relationship. As I am giving the example over here, okay, so if this is a manufacturer, they may have supplier one. Similarly, the same supplier is sending the product to the manufacturer B, right? So this manufacturer is sending to the product to the distributor, or may directly sending to the directly to the customer, and this distributor is sending to the retailer, and so on. So from these three diagrams, we got to know that in a supply chain we may have the multiple parties, and those parties may have the linear or may have the non-linear relationship. Okay, so in a whole picture, we can say that, so this is basically, let's say if this is our manufacturing firm, so we have the first tier of suppliers, those are directly sending the material to us, and we may have the second tier of suppliers, so those suppliers which are sending the material to our supplier or may sending the material to our company. Okay, and from our manufacturing company, we are sending the product to the wholesaler or the distributor, and from the distributor we are sending the product to the retailers. Okay, and the retailers are sending the product to the customers, and so on, right? So as we have discussed earlier, that we are basically managing the product or the service flow, which is basically, you can say, the three types of the flow which we are managing, which is physical, financial, as well as information flow. This is basically the return of the supply chain, or you can say reverse supply chain, or the reverse logistic sense perspective we can consider. Okay, so if I'm going to talk about the structure and the component of the supply chain, so supply chain can be divided into two main component. One is called as upstream supply chain, another is called as a downstream supply chain. Because from supplier to the manufacturer, it's a upstream. From the manufacturer to the customer, we have a downstream supply chain. And this is basically are the manufacturing component, which I am calling as work in process inventory. So in a upstream supply chain, we have the different type of the challenges or the decision which we have to take. Like we have to take the decision regarding sourcing, or you can say procurement, which means selecting the external suppliers. Okay, or we can say developing the pricing or delivery or the payment. So similarly, we are managing the raw material. Okay, receiving and the shipment schedule, and so on. Whereas in a downstream supply chain, we are talking about receiving the customer order, developing the network of the warehouses, and so on, right? Whereas in a work in process, which is basically the manufacturing facility, so we are talking about once we receive the raw material, how we are transforming this raw material into the finished good. So for that, we are basically monitoring the quality planning. Okay, we are developing some production plans, and so on, right? Okay, so if we are talking about the production plan, so which basically meaning the acquisition of the resources and raw material, as well as the planning of the production quantity. So in simple words, when we are transforming the raw material into the finished good, so basically the role of the production planning is, it should tell us that which type of product we have to produce, and how much we have to produce, and at what time we have to produce, while considering our capacity constraints, and we have to meet the customer demand. So that the role of the production plan. Okay, so whenever we are developing the production plan, so we would be able to know which type of product we should produce, how much we should produce, and at what time we should produce, and how much we should produce. However, our capacity constraint shouldn't be violated, and we have to meet the customer demand, and our total production cost, or you can say the total cost, should be minimized. When we are saying the total cost, that means the sum of the production as well as the inventory cost. Okay, so if we are talking about the supply chain planning, so this is similar to the production planning, but only we are basically increasing the scope of the planning part. So here in supply chain planning, we also considering the role of procurement as well as the distribution decision, which mean if we are going to integrate the procurement and the distribution decision with the production planning, then it would be called as a supply chain planning. Okay, so when we are talking about the production planning, so remember that in a production planning, basically we are doing the hierarchical decision, which means we are moving from top to bottom. So we always start from the aggregated forecast demand. Okay, what the meaning of aggregate is? Like if I'm giving the example from the home appliance sector, okay, so first of all, what we will do, we will aggregate the demand based on, let's say, the product family. the product family is, let's say, the air conditioner. Okay, and we have let's say three type of air condition. One is model A, model B, and model C. So what we will do is, on a monthly basis, we will add up all the three models demand, and we will say how much in the month of January we have the demand of the air condition. Okay, that means the sum of all three models. That is basically we are aggregating the demand. Okay, and using those aggregate demand, we are basically predicting, okay, how much the demand will occur in the month of February, how much demand will occur in the month of March, as well as April, and so on. So this uh, horizon is basically called as the planning horizon. Like, if I am saying right now it's a month of January, okay, so I want to plan for the next, so which mean I want to develop, let's say, the aggregate plan for the next 4 months, which mean I am talking about February, March, April, and May. Okay, so this is basically the 4 months is are the planning horizon. Okay, so once we have forecasted this aggregate demand for the next 4 months, okay, based on this demand, which is basically the input for our the aggregate production plan, which is usually developed for the product family level, as I give you the example of aggregate product or the product family. And usually this aggregate production plan is developed for bi-monthly or annually. Okay, so which means 6 months to 12 months we have developed the aggregate production plan, in which the major decision of our is that how much quantity we should produce of a particular product in particular month. Okay, and as well as how much inventory we should maintain of that particular product, what would be the worker force level we have, which means how many workers we are going to need it in that particular month, and how many workers we need to fire if we have the excess of workers. Okay, so that is the usual decision in the aggregate production planning. Okay, once we have developed the aggregate production plan, then we are going to develop the master production schedule, which is basically, you can say, for the master production schedule, aggregate production plan is working as an input to the master production schedule. So for every aggregate production plan, which means for every product family, we are going to break down that product family into every individual SKU in the master production schedule. As I have given you the example of the air condition, so in a master production schedule, the air condition is going to be breakdown for model A separately, model B separately, as well as model C. So which means in an aggregate production plan, we have developed the aggregate production plan at a product family level, which means overall air conditioner. Whereas in a master production schedule, we are going to develop for model A separately, for model B separately, for model C separately, right? For every SKU, we are going to decide in a master production schedule how much model A we are going to produce in which particular, maybe a week. Okay, usually in a master production schedule, we are using the time frame of a week. Okay, so in a particular week, as well as you can say, while considering the capacity of our production system, same is case how much quantity we should produce of product B, as well as how much inventory we should keep in a particular week of the product B, as well as while maintaining the capacity or considering the capacity of our production system, right? Okay, so once we have developed the aggregate production schedule for every SKUs, then this production schedule is going to be the input for the material requirement planning. Okay, like basically, what is the material requirement planning? That is basically the detailed production plan, right? Like if I am saying that we are going to produce model A air conditioner, so as we know that this model A air conditioner is the final product, okay? But in an air conditioner, how many compressor we are going to use, how many tools we are going to use, how many screws we are going to use, okay? So all these components are called as assembly of the components or the sub assemblies, which is basically the bill of material, okay? So which means if I know how many model A of the air conditioner I have to use, then based on the bill of material, I would already can get the values, how much you can say compressor we have needed to produce model A, how many screws, okay, we have to needed, okay. So these are the hierarchical decision which we are doing in the hierarchical production planning decision. But nowadays, people are talking about that because we are doing the stepwise decisions, okay, which mean independent decisions. Once decision is going to be the input of the next decision. Now people are talking about can we integrate these decisions together, okay, which we will talk about later. But right now, usually this is the way you can do the develop the production plan. Okay, so if I am take you the decision matrix of the supply chain planning, which if you can see, this is sourcing, production, distribution, and after sales. We have the three levels of the decisions. So if I'm talking about the production planning and inventory management, basically these are the decision at tactical and execution level, which mean right now in this particular course, although we can start from the demand forecasting, but for in this particular course specifically, I will majorly focusing on the inventory management and advanced planning systems, which mean we will talk about the aggregate production planning, master production schedule, lot sizing, material requirement planning, economic order quantities, ABC as well as XYZ analysis, okay, inventory controlling. So major our topic is going to be on the production planning as well as the inventory controlling part. Regarding the demand forecasting, which we will discuss in our next semester, which is basically demand and supply planning course. Okay. So, if I'm going to talk about the inventory perspective, so inventory has a very critical role in a supply chain. So, how you can define the inventory? That is basically the physical resource which is stored by a firm. Okay, could be in any form, could be in a component form, could be in a work in process inventory form, could be a finished good form. As you can see, we have the work in process inventory at different level of the supply chain. So in this particular course, first of all, I am going to discuss how we can manage the inventory within the supply chain. And then once we will go through all the inventory management topics, or you can see the models of the inventory management. So after that, we will back to the production planning. Okay. So thank you so much. See you in the next video.